עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, יבוא שלום עלינו ועל כולם. סלאם עלינו ועל כל העולם, סלאם, סלאם, סלאם עלינו ועל כל.
This is going to be a little bit of a complex digression, but I want to try to get it out. And the digression starts in the 18th, 19th, 20th century with the discovery of the human being as an essentially symbolizing creature. See, when we studied our ancient texts and so forth, there's a sense of, well, that's what they wrote then, and what do we write now, and how do we understand how we got here? And when anthropologists began to understand myth, they said, well, look what these primitive people do. They write these myths, and they believe in these strange gods. Isn't it interesting what the primitives do? Look at the unusual and fascinating figurations of the savage mind. And then people on the West begin to look at themselves, and they say, well, aren't we essentially symbolizing creatures? So, for example, when you look at psychology, and a person says, well, my mother was this way, my father was that way, and so when I meet people, I act this way. Well, what they're really doing is, when you think about it, is their experience in the family has created a symbolic reality that is more important than, you might say, the factual reality that they discover. Because when standard psychodynamic therapy, someone meets you, you're not you, you are what you remind them of. Now, if that's not evidence, prima facie evidence, that we're ultimately symbolizing creatures, so what we do is we have a deep symbolizing nature of which we are unaware. It's not that you can see it and you look through it, you see the world through it. I mean, it is the lens by which you see the world. From a Kabbalistic perspective, it's cracked and refracted. We don't see the world clearly. So, I mean, how many different disputes do we get into with each other because we see the world so fundamentally differently? It's not that we're arguing about what to do in this world. What we're arguing about is which is the right world. So there are many philosophers of language who began to understand that we human beings are inherently myth-making. And one example I always bring up for those who are new to this idea, that if you look in the Declaration of Independence where it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, meaning it's a religious axiom, that we are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? Notice that's a myth. I've said many times, there's no evidence whatsoever that we are equal in any way whatsoever. There's no empirical way that you can demonstrate that we have rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, or anything else. So the whole idea of equality and human rights, you could say it's a myth because it is not demonstratable whatsoever. Now, what kind of myth is this? The myth is so clear to us that we can't even see that it's something, as it were, discovered by human beings in the spiritual realm. It is not factual, it's not empirical, it's spiritual. Now, I believe it to be true, but it's not something that you can demonstrate. So when you can't demonstrate a life truth, we call that a myth, not in any pejorative sense, just to say that it's a life truth that can't be demonstrated. So people began to realize that we live ensconced in mythical worlds. So once we realize that we human beings are inherently myth-making, symbolizing beings, and then I'll say with the humanistic side, with an eye toward actualization, and on the Jungian side, where the concerns of the soul are primary, suddenly you have a lot of smart Jews who are reading these things engulfed in a world of Jewish text. So they're reading the prayer book, they're reading the Torah, they're rediscovering Hasidic literature, and everything now begins to look different. So there's this discovery of both the beauty of the tradition, the concern of the soul, the drive toward human actualization in the midst of traditional Jewish text and prayer. This is we can talk about it now. I mean, I can talk with somewhat clarity. Back then, it wasn't clear what was happening. It was just clear to me that the things that I was talking about in the mid-1980s when I began to put this together, other people were talking about the exact same thing. And I mean, if you ever have any question about what a zeitgeist is, this was a zeitgeist. That suddenly other people were saying, what about the soul? What's the archetypal meaning of this text? How does studying this text lead us toward human realization or actualization? There's no one person talking about it. I can't find one person who said, here's my idea, everybody listen to me. All over the country, there were people coming up with all of this at roughly the same time. Now, we have the great fortune here of instead of having a library minion, I mean, this synagogue is really founded on this vision. It's founded on love of tradition, that the tradition has this interest of the soul, that its own forms are, in a way, the deepest sense of myth-making and therefore soul-making, with the overt goal of human transformation and actualization as human beings of depth and human beings that can live lives of virtue. That's our core organizing principle.